She was already in his car when he found her, sitting in the back seat with one hand pressed flat against her stomach and the other gripping the leather beside her like she was bracing for impact. Not hiding, not apologetic, just there, occupying his space with the quiet, absolute certainty of someone who had run out of other options and made her peace with it. Kang Joon-ho stood at the open door in the rain and looked at her. She looked back. Neither of them spoke for a full 3 seconds, which is a long time when a man like him is deciding something. Then she turned back to the window, as if the conversation were already over, as if she had calculated exactly what he would do next and was simply waiting for him to do it. Pregnant. Visibly, unmistakably, urgently pregnant. Behind him, Seoul's Incheon airport pulsed with its usual contained chaos. Departure boards blinking, trolleys clattering, a child crying somewhere near Terminal B. Joon-ho registered none of it. He was looking at the woman in his seat, and he was taking note of 4 things in approximately 3 seconds. 1. She was not confused. She knew exactly which car she was in. 2. Her shoes were wrong for rain. Canvas flats, already soaked through. 3. The small bag on the seat beside her was not a purse. It was a hospital bag. 4. She was shaking, not violently, the kind of shaking a person does when they are trying very hard not to. He got in. He did not speak immediately. That was his way, silence before demand, because silence revealed more than questions ever did. He set his laptop bag on the floor, nodded to his driver, closed the door, and the door closed and they were sealed inside together, the two of them, in the quiet, expensive hum of his car. "You're in my car," he said. Not accusatory, just fact, the way he'd say, "You're in my meeting," or "You're in my building." She turned and looked at him, and something shifted in the air between them. Not tension, exactly. More like the moment before lightning, when the sky hasn't cracked yet, but every hair on your arm already knows it will. "I know," she said. Then she went quiet again, back to the window, hand flat on her stomach, as if she had already decided the outcome of this conversation and was simply waiting for him to catch up. Most people, caught in the wrong place by a man like Kang Joon-ho, a man whose net worth had been printed in 3 different business magazines that month, would apologize immediately, profusely, scrambling. She didn't apologize. She said, "I know," and went still, and that stillness was the most unusual thing he had encountered all day. His driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Should I remove her, sir?" He gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Drive." He had learned patience the hard way, not through discipline, but through watching what impatience had cost him. At 32, he had fired a VP for concealing a product delay, only to discover 3 weeks later that the VP had been covering for a systemic flaw Joon-ho himself had approved. He had learned from that to wait, to watch, to gather information before he moved, so he did not demand she explain herself. He sat beside her in silence, let the car pull away from the terminal, and he waited. She was breathing carefully, the kind of careful breathing that means something is not right with your body. Short inhale, controlled exhale, repeat. Her knuckles, where they rested on her stomach, were white. They were on the expressway when she spoke again. "I'm not trying to rob you," she said, still looking out the window. "I know that's probably what you think." "I wasn't thinking that," he said. It was true. What he'd been thinking was considerably more complicated. "I saw your car from the curb. The driver had a placard, but you weren't there yet. She stopped, swallowed. Her hand pressed harder against her stomach, and her eyes closed for a second. When they opened, something in her face was different, tighter.
Needed to sit down.
"I just needed to sit down." The last 3 words came out slightly wrong, not grammatically, emotionally. They had the texture of a sentence that had been edited down from something much longer, much more desperate. "I just needed to sit down" was the version she was willing to give a stranger. The original version was something she was still carrying alone. "How far along?" he asked. She looked at him then, and he could see she hadn't expected that question. 36 weeks. "Where are you trying to go?" She named a hospital. He knew it. Severance in Sinchon. 30 minutes in normal traffic, 45 in rain. "My driver will take you," he said. She shook her head. The movement was small, but definite. "I can't ask you to do that. Just drop me anywhere near a taxi." "You're not asking," he said. "I'm telling him." She went quiet again. The rain picked up, hammering the roof of the car in sudden bursts. The highway lights turned the droplets on the window into long gold streaks. He could have stopped there. That would have been the reasonable, efficient thing. A small detour, a closed transaction, done. But something kept him looking at her. The hospital bag, the soaked shoes, the way she breathed. She had planned this. She had stood at a curb in the rain at one of the busiest airports in Asia, and she had seen his car, and she had made a choice. Desperate people make all kinds of choices, but the ones who make calculated choices, that was a different category of desperation altogether. That was the kind that had already exhausted every other option. "Is there someone at the hospital waiting for you?" he asked. The pause that followed was 3 seconds. He counted. "No," she said. 3. What she carried. Her name was Maya Jensen. She told him that unprompted, and he noticed that too. The deliberate act of introducing herself, of inserting her name into the space between them like a claim. "I am a person. I have a name. I am not just a problem in your car." She was from Atlanta originally. She had come to Seoul 14 months ago with her husband, who worked in international logistics for a company that moved goods between South Korea and the American Southeast. They had met at a rooftop party in Midtown, married fast in the way people do when they are certain, and spent the first 2 years of their marriage genuinely happy. The kind of happy that's built on small, ordinary things, shared playlists and late takeout dinners, and the specific comfort of knowing someone's sleep schedule. They had wanted a baby. That had been mutual, deliberate, joyful. She had taken the pregnancy test in their apartment in Mapogu, near the Han River, and they had held each other in that small, tiled bathroom and laughed with relief. Her husband's name was Derek. She said it carefully, the way you say the name of someone who is no longer yours. 3 months ago, his company had recalled him to Atlanta for what they called a temporary reassignment. He had said he'd be back in 6 weeks. 6 weeks became 8, became 10, became a phone call in which he told her, quietly, she said, with the exhausted honesty of someone who had been holding something back for months, that he didn't think he was coming back, that he had been struggling for longer than he'd admitted, that he was sorry, and that he was telling her now rather than later because he thought she deserved the truth before the baby came. She had been 26 weeks pregnant when he said that. She had no family in Korea. Her Korean was functional but not fluent. Her visa was tied to his employment, which meant that when the company formally processed his departure 3 weeks later, her immigration status became complicated in ways that her HR department had not been able to fully resolve before her maternity leave began. She had a lawyer working on it. The lawyer was working slowly. She had been managing. That was the word she used. Managing. She said it without self-pity, which made it worse somehow, the way a person who has long since stopped expecting sympathy just reports the facts of their life in the same tone they'd use to describe the weather. Tonight, she had gone to the airport to collect a package, documents from her lawyer's office in Atlanta, sent physically because they required original signatures, because nothing about any of this was simple. The package had been delayed. She had stood at the cargo collection desk for 2.5 hours, on her feet, in shoes that had been fine at 8 months but were wrong at 9. And then she had walked out to the curb to catch a taxi, and her body had done the thing it had been threatening to do for the past week, a contraction, real and long and terrifying in its certainty. She had not called anyone because there was no one to call. She had seen his car. "I wasn't going to take it," she said. "I was just going to sit on the curb until it passed, but then it didn't pass." She said this looking straight ahead, not at him. Her voice was completely steady, which was the most alarming thing she had said yet. People who have been managing a controlled crisis for a very long time develop a particular kind of steadiness. It is not calm, it is the absence of the luxury of panic. Junho was silent for a moment. Then he looked at his driver and said, in Korean, "Don't go to Sinchon, go to Samsung Medical, it's faster, and call ahead." He had asked her, somewhere near the Mapo Bridge, whether she was frightened. He wasn't sure why he asked. It was not a question he typically asked people. He asked about timelines, about resources, about what was needed and what it would cost. He did not usually ask about the interior weather of strangers. But something about the way she had described Derek, not with bitterness, not with collapse, but with that careful, almost forensic honesty, had moved him off his usual ground. She had been telling the truth about a painful thing, and she had been telling it precisely, and that precision had made him want to meet it with something more than logistics. She was quiet for longer this time. Another contraction moved through her. He could see it in the way her whole body tightened, the way she turned her face away, the way her breath became something she was managing rather than something that was simply happening. When it passed, she said, "I'm not frightened of the labor. I've been reading about it for months. I know what to expect. I have a plan. I'm frightened of what comes after, of being in a foreign country with a newborn and no family, and a visa situation that isn't resolved, and a lawyer who doesn't call back as fast as I need him to. I'm frightened that I made every reasonable decision. I came here for my marriage. I tried to make it work. I prepared for this baby. I did everything I was supposed to do, and it still ended up like this. I'm not frightened of the pain. I'm frightened that being careful wasn't enough." She stopped. Juno looked out at the expressway ahead and said nothing for a moment. The rain slid down the glass. The city sat low on the horizon, its towers blurred gold in the wet dark. He had spent 20 years building things, companies, systems, contingencies. He had structured his entire professional life around the belief that if you were rigorous enough, thorough enough, if you anticipated enough variables and controlled enough outcomes, the worst wouldn't find you. He had never examined that belief too closely. He had never needed to. Here was a woman who had been thorough, who had planned and prepared and chosen carefully, and had still arrived at this particular curb on this particular rainy night, alone. And she was not asking him to tell her it would be fine. She wasn't asking for reassurance. She was simply naming, with devastating accuracy, the thing that frightened her. Not the pain, not the unknown, but the possibility that doing everything right still hadn't been enough to protect her. He recognized that fear, not from his own life, where success had mostly arrived when he worked for it, but from watching his younger sister, Jun Yan, call him from London at 2 a.m. 8 years ago, after she had done everything right too, after she had loved carefully and trusted reasonably, and still ended up in a flat in Brixton with nothing but a phone and his number. He had solved her problem efficiently. He had asked practical questions and arranged practical solutions, and had her home within a week. He had never once asked her if being careful had been enough. The question hadn't occurred to him then. It occurred to him now. He said, quietly, "Tell him to pull over." She looked at him, not understanding. "I want to make a phone call before we get to the hospital," he said. "It will take 3 minutes." The car pulled onto the shoulder of the expressway. The hazard lights began their slow orange pulse. In the distance, the lights of the city sat low and gold in the rain. He sat for a moment before he dialed. Just a moment, long enough to be deliberate about it, which was different from hesitating. The first call was to his legal team's emergency line. He had used it 3 times in the past decade, once for a hostile acquisition, once for a regulatory crisis in Busan, and once for a personal matter he did not discuss. This was different from all three. He was not protecting an asset. He was not managing exposure. He was simply using the thing he had: access, influence, a team of people whose job was to solve exactly this kind of tangle, and directing it somewhere it had not been directed before. When the line connected, he spoke without preamble, his Korean flat and unhurried. There was an American woman, he said, navigating a visa complication tied to a departing spouse's employment. She was having a baby tonight. He needed someone assigned to her case first thing tomorrow, 9 o'clock, not when someone got around to it, 9 o'clock. Her name was Maya.
Jensen, he spelled it. He told them to expect her call and to treat it with the same priority they treated his own matters. He paused, then added, "She has been handling this alone for 3 months. That ends tomorrow." He ended the call and sat for a beat in the quiet. Maya had not looked at him while he spoke. She was watching the hazard lights reflected in the wet road, orange and slow and steady, and her hand was still on her stomach. He wondered if she was listening. He decided it didn't matter. It was done either way. The second call was to a physician he had met at a fundraising gala 3 years prior, a quiet, precise man from the obstetrics ward at Samsung Medical who had given a speech about the gaps in maternal care that Junho had half listened to while checking his messages. He had not expected to find a use for that evening. He found one now. He spoke in the same unhurried way. A woman, 36 weeks, contracting for at least 40 minutes, traveling alone. He gave the estimated arrival time. He asked, not demanded, that someone be waiting at the entrance. The physician said he would see to it personally. 3 minutes, exactly as he had promised. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at Maya, and she was looking at him with an expression he recognized. The expression of someone who had prepared themselves to receive very little and was recalibrating in real time, quietly, without wanting to make a scene of it.
You didn't
have to do that, she said. "I know," he said.
I know.
There it was. His own words returned to him. "I know." The first thing she had said when he found her in his car. He hadn't understood it then as a kind of answer. He understood it now. The driver pulled back onto the expressway. The city came up around them slowly, its towers blurred by rain, its river black and wide and indifferent to all of it. They arrived at 11:47 p.m. A nurse was waiting at the entrance, exactly as arranged, and the small choreography of that, the nurse appearing, Maya being guided gently inside, no waiting, no explaining herself at a desk to someone who might or might not decide her situation warranted urgency, reduced Maya to the one moment of visible emotion Junho witnessed all night. She stood at the automatic doors and pressed her lips together, and her eyes filled, and she did not let it become more than that. She was a woman who had been holding herself together for 3 months. She was not going to come apart now, with the end of the hardest stretch in sight. She turned back to him. He had followed her to the door, some sense that the transaction wasn't complete, or perhaps simply that the human thing was to see a person through a door rather than deposit them at a curb. "Thank you," she said. Then, looking at him more directly, "I'm sorry I took your car." "You needed it more than I did," he said. And then, because he was not a man who reached for the neat, clean thing when the honest thing was available, "My sister did something like this once, got herself somewhere she wasn't supposed to be because she was out of options. I asked her the wrong questions. I've thought about that." Maya looked at him for a long moment. The rain fell between them, soft now, almost finished. What would the right questions have been? He thought about it. "The ones you answered in the car," he said. Another contraction moved through her. He could see it, the tightening, the controlled breath, the 5 seconds of silence that was actually an act of enormous will. When it released, she almost smiled. "Go," he said. She went. The baby was born at 4:22 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, during a rainstorm that the weather service had not predicted, and that cleared entirely by morning, leaving Seoul washed and bright and smelling of wet stone. A girl, 3 kilograms, 200 grams, healthy. Maya named her Se-yeon, a Korean name, 2 syllables that meant something like auspicious and beautiful, depending on the characters chosen, paired with an American middle name.
It was a deliberate act, that name, a claim of belonging to two places at once, made on behalf of a child who had not asked to be born into the middle of so much uncertainty, and who deserved, her mother had decided, to carry something that acknowledged where she had arrived into the world. Maya had chosen it weeks before the birth. She had not told anyone because there had been no one to tell. She told the nurse who asked, and the nurse had smiled, and that had been enough. The visa situation, with the assistance of Junho's legal team who called at 9 o'clock exactly as instructed, was resolved within 6 weeks. It was not a simple resolution, but it was a thorough one. When Maya called to thank him, she told him she had decided to stay in Korea for at least another year. She had a community now, small but real. Her Korean had improved. Seyeon, she said, had already started making sounds that were difficult to classify as either language, and she wasn't sure what to make of that, but she thought it was probably fine. Junho listened to all of this. Then he asked how she was sleeping. She laughed. "You ask the right questions now," she said. He had no good response to that, so he didn't offer one. He just filed it away in the part of his mind that stored the things worth keeping. Maya Jensen had been careful and capable and prepared, and none of it had been enough to prevent the life she had planned from unraveling. But when it unraveled, she didn't lie down. She stood at a curb in the rain and she looked at what was available and she made the clearest decision she could with what she had. And Kang Junho, the man who had spent his life optimizing, transacting, solving, found out that the question he had been too efficient to ask his own sister was the one that had the power to stop a car on a highway in the rain. Not what do you need, not what's the cost, just are you frightened? Was being careful enough? Two people, the same rainy Tuesday, the same dark and ordinary miracle of being in the right place at the right moment, and both of them changed in different ways by what they were willing to say out loud inside a car that neither of them had planned to share.